Welcome everybody. In this video we're going to talk about finding the zeros of a function by factoring. So we're given this function f of x equals 8x cubed minus 2x squared minus x and asked to find the zeros. And later on we'll also talk about how the zeros and the x-intercepts relate. But for now, remember that the zeros are the values of x that make the entire function 0. So if we change f of x and just make it 0, what are the values that we'd put in for x that make this entire function 0? Well, the way we can solve for this is by factoring. So first thing we want to do is check, is there any greatest common factor we can remove from all the terms in order to make this a little simpler? And yeah, there is. We can factor out an x from each term. So if we remove an x from each term, that leaves us with 8x squared minus 2x minus 1. And then just check to make sure if you redistributed this back in, would you get the original, just to be sure that you factored it correctly, and yes, we would. So we already have one factor's x, and now we have this quadratic in here that we need to factor. So this one's a little bit more complicated here. So let's walk through the factoring process again. Remember, if we take 8 and multiply it by 1, we get a new polynomial of x squared minus 2x minus 8. From here, we can set up our two binomials, and we can ask ourselves, what two factors or two things that multiply to give us negative 8 will add up to give us negative 2? Well, so if we look over here, and what are all the things that we can multiply together to give us negative 8? Well, we can have 1 and negative 8. We could have negative 1 and 8. We could have 2 and negative 4. We could have negative 2 and 4. Which of these add up to give us negative 2? Well, if I'm looking at this, 2 plus a negative 4, this gives us negative 2. So we know that at the back end of these binomials is going to be a positive 2 and a minus 4. And in the front part, well, we know how to get that. That's just x times x gives us the x squared. So x and x is going to go up front. Again, make sure that you factor this correctly. Go ahead and multiply this back out just to ensure you do get x squared minus 2x minus 8. Always just double check to make sure that you factor correctly. From here, remember, we multiplied by 8, so now what we have to do is divide each side by 8. And then we're going to go ahead and simplify our fractions. So x plus, this is going to be 1/4. And then we have x minus 1/2. From here, we don't like fractions when we factor, so we're going to take these denominators and multiply them back out in front of the x. So this becomes 4x plus 1, and over here becomes 2x minus 1. So now we have our factors that would give us back our 8x squared minus 2x plus 1. All right, and don't forget about this original factor. So our full factored form now to get 8x cubed minus 2x squared minus x is down here. So it's x times 4x plus 1 times 2x minus 1. And remember, all of this is equal to 0. Knowing this, in order for these three things multiplied together to give us 0, either x needs to be equal to 0, 4x plus 1 needs to be equal to 0, or 2x minus 1 needs to be equal to 0. So what are all those values of x? Well, very simply, we just set each factor equal to 0. So I'm just going to do that over here for space. So our first factor is just x, so that's x equals 0. Our second factor is 4x plus 1 equals 0. And if we solve for x, we would subtract 1 on both sides, and then we would divide by 4. So x would give us negative 1/4. And then finally, our last factor is 2x minus 1 equals 0. And if we solve for x, we would add 1 on both sides, and then divide by 2, giving us x equals a positive 1/2. And those are our three zeros of the function. X equals 0, x equals negative 1/4, and x equals 1/2. If we took any of these three and put them in for x, the entire function would equal 0. So how does this relate to the x-intercepts? Well, these are the points where this graph would cross the x-intercept. And the way that we would label this is that any x-intercept would have a value of y equals 0. So if we listed these as xy coordinates, the x-intercept here would be 0, 0. Our x value here is going to be negative 1/4 with a value of 0 for y. And for 1/2, our value of x is 1/2. Our value of y is 0. So these three are our x-intercepts. See how they're just listed a little bit differently, but the zeros of the function are the x-intercepts. We list the zeros as values of x that make the function 0, and our x-intercepts are listed as coordinate points x, y,